Have you ever wondered just how much the thoughts in your head control your life? Well, I want you to look at this optical illusion and tell me what you see. Some people initially see an old, haggard lady, whereas some other people initially see a young, beautiful woman. But why is that? Well, this study from 2018 found that older participants were much more likely to perceive the older woman in the illusion compared to younger participants, perhaps because their own process of aging was influencing their everyday thinking. But what this image and experiment tells me is that if what we think about affects how we perceive the world, then can we change the ways that we think to dramatically improve the ways that we look at our lives? I want you to imagine for a moment that our minds are like a garden, and all the thoughts that we have are the vast array of plants and greenery in that garden. So in this video, we're going to do some psychological gardening. We're going to identify the roots of the thoughts in your mental garden that aren't serving you. We're going to pull out those roots, and then we're going to investigate how to plant and nurture new seeds to develop healthier thought patterns. Aaron Beck was a well-known cognitive psychologist from the 19th century, and he was particularly interested in how our emotions are driven by our thought patterns. In particular, he was interested in depression and anxiety. When you're a child, your idea of the world and your sense of self is so malleable. And Beck theorized that when we have difficult experience as a child, we can develop unhealthy core beliefs and dysfunctional assumptions about how the world works and how we should act within it. For example, if you experienced a level of emotional neglect or coldness as a child, you may develop the unhealthy core belief that you are fundamentally unlovable. Or if love is not unconditional and you have to act in a certain way to receive love from your parents, then you may develop this dysfunctional assumption that you have to be 100% perfect in order to be worthy of receiving love. Beck said that unhealthy core beliefs and dysfunctional assumptions lead us to interpret events negatively. Specifically, he claimed that people experience negative automatic thoughts because of these baseline views of the world, negative thoughts about themselves, about the world, and about their future in what he called the Negative Triad. And the reason I think this theory is important is because it suggests that a lot of the negative thoughts that we experience are because of core beliefs that we have that we may not even be consciously aware of. The roots of the plants in our mental garden can be incredibly deep, so much so that they reach down to our early childhood. But luckily, Beck didn't think that these were fixed. In fact, he believed that with work, they could be changed. And that's one of the main focuses of cognitive behavioral therapy, the most researched and potentially most effective psychological therapy there is. But the first part of my system to actually think more positively is to identify the unhealthy core beliefs and dysfunctional assumptions that you may possess. For me, this came from looking closely at how my mind feels when I don't feel good about myself and what beliefs come to mind. For example, a few years ago, I had the unhealthy core belief that the world was a judgmental place, and the dysfunctional assumption that to feel good about myself, I had to be validated by other people out in the world. And what that did is it made the self-critical thoughts in my mind incredibly loud. Your beliefs and assumptions may and probably will look very different to mine. But the important thing is when you start identifying where your negative thoughts might be coming from, you can start extracting and challenging the parts of the mental garden that do not serve us. As I mentioned earlier, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short, is the most researched psychological therapy there is for mood disorders like depression and anxiety. But the great thing about CBT is that its principles can be done even without a therapist. You can do this stuff by yourself from the comfort of your own home. The main thing that helps patients during CBT is identifying, detaching from, and challenging the negative thoughts and beliefs that we hold in our minds. And we can also do those things just from being reminded that it is possible. And in my system, to actually think more positively, pulling out the roots of the negative thoughts in our mental garden comes from that process of detaching and challenging the thoughts in our minds. We have to recognize that who we are and what we think about are not the same thing. Thoughts that we have are just like any other experience we have in the world. It's like the feeling of water on our body when we take a shower, or the taste of food on our tongue. And we also have to recognize that our thoughts don't always have our best interests at heart, and they don't always reflect reality. But to actually know these things, we have to strengthen our self-awareness and seek evidence for the futility of our negative thoughts. Knowledge is power, and real-world evidence is more convincing than anything anyone will be able to tell you. To use my own example, my core belief that the world was a judgmental place gave me anxiety when I went to venture forth into the world. It created worrying thoughts in my head about what people might be thinking about me and how things may potentially go wrong. But after a while, I gradually understood that these thoughts were not my own creation and that they were actually my mind's natural response to the anxiety. But most importantly, I realized when I ventured forth into the world, despite my anxiety, people actually didn't care that much about me, and things, more often than not, didn't go wrong. And it was only through recognizing that I could change the way that I interacted with my own thoughts that allowed me to stop believing something that didn't serve me. So now we've started to identify and pull out the weeds of our minds, we have to learn to plant and nurture new seeds for healthier core beliefs and more functional assumptions to grow. But to do that, we need to use this, the belief, action, justification feedback loop, which is my theoretical model of how we introduce and maintain new belief systems. If you want to introduce a new belief into your life, you cannot just force yourself to believe it. It just doesn't work like that. Your brain wants to see real world evidence. So let's say you wanted to introduce the new belief that you are enough. According to the model, you first have to act as if you already hold that belief, even if you initially don't. You have to play the game of being someone who believed that they were enough, just like you did when you dressed up as a superhero or a princess when you were a kid. So in this example, someone who believed that they were enough would take their life seriously and work hard to build a better life for themselves. They would also prioritize and strengthen their relationships as they believe they are a person of value that can make other people happy. And when these actions are taken based upon a healthier belief, more often than not, good outcomes will occur. Your relationships will improve, you'll have higher self-esteem, and potentially you'll see some results from the hard work you've been putting in. These beneficial effects then act as justification, as real-world evidence for your mind to continue believing that thing. And therefore you will have more motivation to take action on that belief in the future, and the feedback loop continues. When you plant a new seed, you have to water it and give it nutrient-dense soil for it to grow. And your belief systems are very similar. You have to water a belief through action like it's a seed during germination. And as that positive feedback loop progresses, it just increases the prevalence of that belief in your brain until it is second nature. And you know what? You actually then start believing it. And this shit does actually seem to work. It's not just some woo-woo law of attraction dogma, right? Yes, it needs a little bit of faith from you, but the new belief arrives through your own concrete, real-world actions. But don't just take it from me.
Yeah, I would visualize,
This is when you were broke and poor.
You know, right, having directors interested in me and people that I respected saying, you know, I like your work or whatever that is. And I would visualize things coming to me that I wanted or whatever.
This was in like 1987, 85,
yeah.
And
I had nothing at that time, so it was like, but it just made me feel better. It made me, at that time, all it really was for me was kind of making me feel better. I would drive home and think, well, I do have these things, and they're out there. I just don't have a hold of them yet, but they're out there.
Tomorrow doesn't exist. The next hour does not exist. It's all potential. But what we can do is drag the time into the present, now. Into the solar plexus of our soul. Build the ditches. Whatever you want to do, believe it, believe it, believe it, even if you don't believe. Play the game of belief. Act as if you believe. That is power. That is sheer power.
So didn't you write yourself a check? I heard that you did. Is that true?
I wrote myself a check for $10 million for acting services rendered, and I gave myself 5 years, or 3 years maybe. And I dated it Thanksgiving 1995, and I put it in my wallet and I kept it there, and it deteriorated and stuff. But then, just before Thanksgiving 1995, I found out that I was going to make $10 million on, I think it was Dumb and Dumber.
That's the actual check I wrote myself 4 years ago, and that's so I'm kind of here to say that visualization does work.
So that's the system that I'm trying to use every single day to promote positive thinking in my own life. That's the game that I've decided I'd like to play. If you want to see a video that I worked pretty hard on that looks at self-belief and building self-belief specifically, then you can watch that here. But with that said, play the game, manage your mental garden, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.